The United States of America has demanded reparations from Iran for all the wars in the region over the past 47 years and compensation for all the families of Iranian protesters killed within Iran itself. US President Donald Trump, in response to Iran's conditions for a peace agreement, put forward his own demands. Tehran must pay compensation for the people who died in wars, attacks, and during protests. Meanwhile, shipping traffic through the Strait of Hormuz on that same Monday collapsed on the day this statement was made. It dropped to 6 ships compared to an average of about 11 ships over the previous 10 days and nearly 150 ships per day in pre-war times. So it seems that the parties will not be able to agree on reopening the Strait of Hormuz. And yet, against this backdrop, the stock market reacts in a completely opposite way. It moves in the opposite direction and actually opens in positive territory. So let's break down exactly what Trump said, why the markets reacted in such a mixed way, and what we should expect next regarding the Strait of Hormuz, oil prices, and the overall situation in the Middle East. The latest updates are in this episode. My name is Pechiy. Let's break it down, but before we start, please subscribe to this channel. We're moving toward the mark of 300,000 subscribers. So I would be grateful for each of your subscriptions. It only takes a second, but it's very, very important. So, remember how we discussed that recently Iran put forward a whole list of demands to the United States of America, and only after these demands are met is it ready to open the Hormuz Strait for commercial shipping. In addition to lifting sanctions and unfreezing all assets, Iran demanded that the United States pay reparations and indemnities for this war and for the war of 2025. Basically, the United States must cover all losses without exception, and now Trump has decided to respond to all of this. Speaking at the White House, he stated that the war against Iran began to prevent that country from having nuclear weapons and assured that, in fact, compensation terms were not discussed at negotiations with the United States. And basically, he said the Iranians made this up, and then he immediately made a counter-move, quote, "But that's an interesting idea because now I also demand compensation from Iran for all the people they killed and seriously wounded with their bombs and the many conflicts they are known for." And then Trump listed specific categories of victims for whom, in his opinion, Iran should now pay. These are the families of those killed on the American ship Cole, thousands of others killed in combat, as well as the families of hundreds of thousands of innocent protesters whom, according to him, Iran has killed over the past 50 years. As he put it, quote, "Not to mention the 52,000 who were killed in the last 5 months," and then Trump summed up. Therefore, if anyone should compensate for the damage, in my opinion, it should be Iran. And if you go to his social network, Truth Social, he posted a whole list of reasons why Iran should pay for all the wars in the region, for attacks on Americans, for actually killing protesters, and so on and so on. Basically, he says, listen, Iran should be the one to pay. And in the end, Trump assured, quote, "Kai, I instructed my representatives to clearly take this into account in any future negotiations." So now Trump has stated that his team should bill Iran, otherwise there will be no negotiations at all. Later that same day, Trump made another statement that shows his current position on the Strait of Hormuz as a whole. Quote, "Miten sento di midi di kanti contains." Listen, the only one who actually really controls the Strait of Hormuz right now is the United States Navy. And we have completely cleared all the mines from the entire strait. So, basically, Trump publicly claims that actual control over the strategic waterway has already passed to the American fleet. And that supposedly he has already cleared all the mines from the entire Hormuz Strait, regardless of whether an agreement with Tehran will be signed or not, although in reality that's not the case at all. And the Hormuz Strait is clearly not under the control of the United States of America. And the context of these statements is extremely important. The Iranian demands that Donald Trump is now responding to mostly corresponded to the terms of the preliminary peace agreement signed back in June. That very agreement, which was later disrupted by the renewed fighting. Let me remind you once again, the day before, one of the representatives of the Iranian regime flat out said that we are making demands and even issuing an ultimatum to the United States of America. And that means, do not threaten Iran, do not threaten Iran's proxy forces, pay compensation, reparations, indemnities, lift sanctions, unfreeze assets, and so on. And many people perceive this.
Это, слушайте, ну это наглость какая-то. Но
Iran is now trying to return to the negotiating position from 2 months ago, demanding compensation and the lifting of sanctions. And Trump, in response, puts forward a counterclaim that's far larger. Compensation not for months, but for half a century of wars. That's it. And the point is that Trump was still outsmarted. Because yes, you can emotionally say that Iran is not wrong. Iran really is not wrong. I emphasize so that no one is mistaken. Iran, the current regime in Tehran, is clearly a terrorist entity that finances all the proxy forces in the region that destabilize this region. Iran is the country that shot down the Ukrainian Boeing. It's the country that helps Russia fight against Ukraine. So I have no illusions about Iran. You shouldn't think that I support Iran. Absolutely not. No. But, you know, when people ask the question, who does Pechiy support? When you ask who he supports, that means I've done my job perfectly. So, let's get back to the topic. But Trump was outsmarted, because in the Memorandum of Understanding that Donald Trump signed with Iran on June 17, there was actually a clause, let me remind you, stating that the United States, the US and its allies commit to creating an investment fund of $300 billion for the reconstruction of Iran. Remember? This is exactly what Iran calls compensation for war damages, and Trump agreed to this condition at the time. That's why Iran is now reminding everyone, listen, there was such a condition, so you have to compensate. Moreover, the actual maritime situation in the Strait of Hormuz confirms that there is essentially no agreement. Shipping data shows that traffic through the strait on Monday dropped to 6 vessels compared to an average of about 11 vessels over the previous 10 days. By Tuesday, according to Pechiy, 4 vessels entered the strait to carry crude oil, including 2 empty product tankers and 2 vessels left, a small liquefied gas tanker and another vessel with residual fuel oil. For comparison, before the war, usually 130 to 140 vessels passed through the strait per day. Now it's 6. But according to Trump, and don't forget this, the Americans have full control over the strait. And here an interesting situation unfolds, because with such an apparently clear and alarming background, financial markets are reacting in mixed ways. On Monday, right after Trump made a counter-demand for compensation, oil futures jumped by more than 5%. And experts immediately stated that they do not expect the price of oil to fall below $80 per barrel in the near future, unless there is a surprise. If a surprise agreement is suddenly announced, which would lead to the opening of the Hormuz Strait, since the balance in the oil market is becoming increasingly tight. Gold, on the other hand, fell in price on Tuesday earlier in the session after reaching its highest level in more than 2 months. The rise in oil prices and concerns that inflation and interest rates in the US may remain high due to the increase in oil prices ultimately drove investors away from the safe haven asset, that is gold. But here's what's significant. Despite all this background, Wall Street, on the other hand, opened higher on Tuesday morning on reports that the US and Iran are indeed close to reaching an agreement. Despite all this rhetoric, an agreement that could put an end to the conflict that has been ongoing for 6 months. Well, to be fair, the growth was modest because the Dow Jones index at the start of the session rose by 0.13% and the Nasdaq went up by 0.24%. And the S&P 500 strengthened by 0.1%. Of course, this is far from the confident rally that the market showed in June when, after the first preliminary agreement, the indices soared by up to 2% in a single session. Well, that is, investors believe in the possibility of a deal, but they are much more cautious about it than a few months ago. So, what's the result? On one hand, Trump, with his counter-demand for compensation for half a century of conflicts, is actually raising the stakes in the negotiations so much that the likelihood of a quick agreement with Iran is decreasing. Well, it's hard to imagine Tehran agreeing to such terms, just as it's hard to imagine the United States agreeing to pay reparations to Iran. So, when such counterterms are set, well, it looks like no agreement is expected anytime soon. Meanwhile, shipping through the Strait of Hormuz is practically paralyzed. 6 ships instead of the usual 150 per day. On the other hand, Donald Trump himself simultaneously states that the Strait is already effectively under the control of the American fleet and even cleared of mines. Well, in practice, it acts as if the issue has already been resolved by military means, regardless of the outcome for the deputies. And here comes the most important detail, which I urge you to pay the most attention to. Former US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo clearly noted today that Iran is ready to escalate the conflict with America in order to influence the outcome of the congressional elections. Supposedly, Iran is interested in the defeat of the Republican Party in the midterm congressional elections and will do everything to achieve this. Here's a quote, Pompeo. They understand perfectly well that the elections are approaching and they really want President Trump to lose them. We have never had a president who would strike their army so hard. No previous president, neither Republican nor Democrat, was ready for this, so they want to see someone else win this election. Under these circumstances, Iran may soon escalate the conflict both against the US and against the Gulf countries in order to provoke an increase in oil prices and show that Washington does not control the situation. I'll add this, and only after the midterm elections can we hope that the balance of power will shift a bit. In the United States of America, the Democrats will take the majority in the House of Representatives. They will start to put pressure. And supposedly then it will be possible to negotiate on some new terms. This is most likely the entire strategy of Iran. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, click the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye everyone. Bye.